Awareness Week, and we're going to start off with Quran recitation by Hamza, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كيف تكفرون بالله وكنتم أمواتا فأحياكم ثم يميتكم ثم يحييكم ثم إليه ترجعون. هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا ثم استوى إلى السماء فسواهن 7 سماوات وهو بكل شيء عليم. وإذ قال ربك للملائكة إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك قال إني أعلم ما لا تعلمون. وعلم آدم الأسماء كلها ثم عرضهم على الملائكة فقال أنبئوني بأسماء هؤلاء إن كنتم صادقين. قالوا سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. قال يا آدم أنبئهم بأسمائهم فلما أنبأهم بأسمائهم قال ألم أكن لكم إني أعلم غيب السماوات والأرض وأعلم ما تبدون وما كنتم تكتمون. وإذ قلنا للملائكة اسجدوا لآدم فسجدوا إلا إبليس أبى واستكبر وكان من الكافرين. How can you disbelieve in Allah when you were lifeless and He brought you to life? Then He will cause you to die and then He will bring you back to life. And then to Him you will be returned. It is He who created for you all of that which is on earth. Then He directed Himself to the heavens and made them 7 heavens, and He is knowing of all things. And O Muhammad, when your Lord said to the angels, indeed I will make upon the earth a successful authority, they said, will you place upon it one who causes corruption therein and shed blood, while we exalt you with praise and declare your perfection? He, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, said, indeed I know that which you do not know. And He taught Adam alayhi salam the names, all of them, and He showed them to the angels and said, inform me of the names of these if you are truthful. They said, exalt are you, we have no knowledge except what you have taught us. Indeed, it is you who is the knowing and wise. He said, O Adam alayhi salam, inform them of their names. And then He had informed them of their names. He said, did I not tell you that I know the unseen of the heavens and the earth, and I know what you reveal and what you have concealed. And when we said to the angels, prostrate before Adam alayhi salam, so they prostrated except Iblis, he refused and was arrogant and became one of the disbelievers.
So inshallah, before we start, I'm just going to give a little bit of a summary of what IAW is. So it's Islamic Awareness Week, and basically we have this tent over here on my right from Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. So whenever you want to come through the tent, if you're free, Just come inside and you guys can have some activities, and then there's a breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. So inshallah, we're going to be having dinner after this. So moving on to the theme of this year. So the theme of this year revolves around the major stages of life for like a human, and how it revolves around a greater purpose. So today's topic is origin of life. So the entire idea here is to show the pre-life, bringing clarity on who is our creator and the reality of lives as well. This should clear out those dawah questions or doubts we often tend to get, such as where did we come from and how were we all born as Muslims. So inshallah, without further ado, Chaplain Kaiser will be giving the talk today, and he is the chaplain for Rutgers, the Center of Islamic Life at Rutgers University.
Sounds good. بسم الله الحمد لله الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي رب زدني علما. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we send peace and blessings upon our final messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullah. Just seeing how cold you are. Okay. Peace be upon all of you. Alhamdulillah, it's an honor to be here, and I wanted to go for the record. Harun just told me that by the time I'm back, it'll only be 5 minutes, so you better stop. No, I'm kidding. He was so nice about it, mashallah. But alhamdulillah, it's always a pleasure to be here at IAW Islam Awareness Week on this campus. And for those of you who are joining us, you are our special guests, alhamdulillah. It's great to have you with us. It's a week in which we try to present a bunch of things that are really happening. One is, of course, it's called Islam Awareness Week. So what is this thing called Islam that motivates us so much that it's our primary identity that we want to lead with? So getting some understanding in terms of what that is. Who are Muslims? On this campus particularly, alhamdulillah, we are blessed with about 5,000 Muslim students. It is actually the highest population of Muslim students anywhere in the country in terms of on a singular campus. So alhamdulillah, that's where we are. And so Islam Awareness Week also showcases how this tradition of Islam has impacted and can be showcased in the lives of Muslim students on this very campus. So you're here to witness that as well. And of course, it's also just supposed to be an idea of how do we bridge those two things together. Meaning that Islam says certain things. There are certain traditions there are certain things within our Islamic tradition that call us towards living a balanced life, that appreciating things about the life we came from and the life that we're headed to. It's both for the Muslims and the non-Muslims to take some time to understand these are real divine truths that I need to be thinking about, especially as I'm developing into the person I am going to be. That's actually what you're here in college to do. I know that a lot of times it's the stepping stone before you get a job or before the next degree, but actually your education was supposed to allow you to inherit your complicated and complex identity in a more wholesome manner. And one of the aspects of who you are is actually, what do you believe? What are the truths that are deeper than I wore a black shirt today, I'm going to eat this today, I'm going to get this job? There's more to you. And that's actually what I wanted to unpack today as we talk about the stations of life, inshallah. I was really happy when the IAW team told me that the journey, subway theme, okay, the journey that we'll be going through as we have these train stops is going to be understanding the journey of a human soul. And what a beautiful way to start, because the journey of a human soul in our tradition doesn't start with the birth of the human being in this life. It actually starts earlier than that. And that's mainly what I'm going to be focusing on today. But actually, based on the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ and the descriptions of this in the Quran, in a nutshell, the human soul goes through 6 existences. And today we're primarily going to focus on the first one. Imam al-Haddad, a scholar within our tradition, compiled descriptions of each of these spaces that a human being passes through, and he clarifies them as 6 of them. And he says the first one is referenced, and it's going to be one of the ayat that I talk about today. I'm going to talk about 3 sets of ayat. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the 7th chapter of the Quran, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took from the loins of Adam and we'll talk about what loins, actually I'm not going to talk about what loins mean, but I remember when I was younger, I had to translate this ayah, just like we had the recitation and translation just now, and I translated it as from the lions of Adam. I was like, so cool. Adam had lions? No, that's not what that means. But we'll talk about that. And today what I want to touch on as well is, while the origin of life is one of the big questions that religions try to answer, what is the Islamic approach to the origin of life? Because how a tradition speaks about the origin of life oftentimes encapsulates the worldview of that tradition. When the origins of life are spoken about, it just randomly happened. It's just a thing. You know what that also means? You're just a thing. But when the origin of life is talked about in an honored manner, you were fashioned, created, and created from the Most High. You know what that tells you and me? You're meant to do something. But when you say, what happened? Random stuff. Bunch of mud bumped into some other mud, and there you are. You're gonna think you're what? I'm just a bunch of chaotic mud. We'll talk about that. I'm setting the stones, inshallah, to stack up. But anyway, that's the approach that's first taken from, God says when we took from the loins of Adam, ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ, their children, وَأَشْهَدْهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ, and we had them all testify, أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ, am I not your Lord? Am I not your sustainer? And all of us apparently said, قَالُوا بَلَا شَهِدْنَا. Bala, there's no real good translation of it in English, but it's like, of course, definitely. We are willing to take testimony of that right now. And Allah continues it saying, أَن تَقُومُوا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ إِنَّا كُنَّا عَنْ هَذَا غَافِلِينَ. So that you wouldn't be able to say on the Day of Judgment that we weren't aware. The first stage of life of the human being in our tradition is actually the existence of a soul. That your soul was created way earlier than your body was. So that's the first station of the human being. And then in our tradition, it says that your soul was blown into the womb of your mother. And actually, one of the existences in the Islamic tradition is life in the womb. I, alhamdulillah, have the honor of having, I have 2 children, alhamdulillah, and the third one is on the way. So I have a negative 2-month-old. Alhamdulillah. And one of the things I can tell you is I don't think I appreciated this life until I got to experience supporting my wife as a father. Or to be father and then a father and a to be father. Anyway, you get the point. But we sometimes think that this isn't a life, but she can tell you more than I can. Yes, it is. The personality of a child in the womb is kind of interesting. There are times that each of our 3 children kicked at different things. This one who's coming in right now, mashallah, very interesting one. Anytime I'm anywhere near her, either this child doesn't like me very much, so kicks me a lot, or my interpretation is, wants to give me a hug. We'll find out in a few months, inshallah, which one is true. But it's this idea that you had actually a life in the womb. And sometimes we don't think about this being a consequential life, but I want you to think about something. How much of your life was determined while you were in your mother's womb? We can talk about this genetically today, where a lot of your potential was actually determined when you were developing in your mother's womb. What you looked like to an extent is a consequence of what? How you eat, what you drink, if you work out, stress levels, all of these type of things, but some of it is also just based on what genes you inherited. This was an entire life, an entire existence that you actually went into. And then it had consequences to the next stage of life, which is the life of this world. But before we move on, again, remember, today I'm not going to be focusing on that. We're going to have the next couple of speakers talk about the life of this world and life in the hereafter. Today is just actually before we were even here. But I want you to think about that. How much of what happened to you then had massive consequences to what? The life that you have now. So much of it, we don't even remember it, right? And that analogy is actually like the analogy of the life of this world compared to the life in the hereafter. That what you do here will have massive consequences in terms of the quality of your life in the next life to come. Just like what happened to you in that existence that none of you remember. Anyone remember? Okay, that would have been weird if someone did. I would have had so many questions for you. Okay, but no one remembers that, right? But it has so many consequences to who you are as a person now. Was inherited then. The same thing will actually be the case when we wake up after this life. There will be a existence that we are in, and it will be solely determined on what happened in the life before. Does that make sense? Everyone following me? Okay, so that's the life in the womb. Then the one that comes after that is the life of this world, ad-dunya. In Imam Haddad's book, he actually puts out not just like chronologically, but also puts up in order, like which one's the highest. Dunya is the lowest. So the way it's supposed to be understood is life is actually more like a parabola in terms of its, I don't want to get too physics here, but some of you know me, I love giving you vectors. But if we were to talk about a y-axis and an x-axis, the x-axis would have been chronology, the y-axis would be closeness to God. And actually the understanding is the closeness to God was higher when you were a soul, a little bit lower than that, but still quite high when you were in your mother's womb, and then the lowest in dunya. But even amongst that, there's an understanding that you're closest to God in 2 moments of your life. When you are just born, that's why children are amazing. I'm not just saying that because I want some of you to babysit my kids. But children are honestly amazing. There are times in which you will interact with a child and you will see something divine, that there's something beautiful and pure. And as Muslims, we believe that that's because children are on what's known as fitrah. Fitrah means, remember how I said God said to the angel, God said like, am I not your Lord? And we all testified. You have an innate programming from God to recognize God and to be good. There are some traditions that say the human being is inherently evil. Muslims say the human being is inherently good. And we'll talk about what calls them towards evil in just a little bit, but you are inherently good, and children have that. And also on the other side of it, those who are closest to death oftentimes also are in that state of leaving this lowest dunya and moving on to the next life. So far we're at 3. Womb, souls, womb, and this dunya or this world. What do you think comes next? Barzakh. Muslims believe that there is a life when you die, that you go to this place called barzakh. And barzakh ends up being almost like a waiting period between when you have passed away and when the day of judgment takes place. And it's actually an interesting idea between these. And when a Muslim gets up in the morning, one of the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, is you wake up and you say, Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'da amatana wa ilayhi an-nushur. That all praise and all gratitude. I'm so grateful that I woke up today. Why? I woke up after I had fallen into death, and to my Lord I will be returning. And what this is based off of is actually the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. And the reason I keep saying that is Muslims have this idea that the way that you speak about something encapsulates and should represent what you think about something in your heart. So when we say the name of a prophet, for example, like I'm going to talk about Prophet Adam, I'm going to talk about Prophet Jesus, I'm going to talk about Prophet Moses. After all of them, we say alayhi salam, which means on them be peace. Because if we can't speak about them with some degree of honor, we won't be able to honor them in our hearts. So that's why when we say their names, we respect them too much. Like when I say the name of Mary, the mother of Jesus, I also say alayhi salam, on her be peace. Because we can't talk about someone who's revered without also mentioning their reverence with our tongues as well. So, as we were going about this, what was I talking about? I just got distracted. Barzakh. That barzakh is supposed to be this waiting period. That when a Muslim wakes up in the morning, they say that actually I'm so glad that I got woken up again by God. God gave me life after I had died. Because there's a narration of the Prophet Muhammad in which he said that sleep is the sister of death. Just like when you wake up from your sleep, there will be a time that you wake up from this life. And in that time, the first thing that you say will be representative of how you wake up or what your life was actually about. So that's why part of the Muslim personality is supposed to be that when you wake up in the morning, you should wake up with gratitude. Because what are you planning? That at one point, what's going to happen? You're going to fall asleep, and you're not going to wake up to the next day. You're going to wake up to the next life. And you want to wake up in the state of gratitude, happiness, fulfillment, and purpose. So that's why when you wake up even in this life, you're supposed to say that. Following me? So barzakh is supposed to be when you wake up from your sleep like death from this life and you wake up in this waiting period. And in that waiting period, it's a preview of where you're going to keep going after that. This is oftentimes understood to be amongst the short, long legs of your journey. And then there's sometimes journeys that last just a small amount of time. But the barzakh is seen as just that. That people will wake up and they'll be in this state of like, was that even real? You know how sometimes you wake up in the morning and you saw like this crazy long dream, and then other times you're like, I just hit the pillow. How is it morning time already? Anyone have those? If that happens to you really often, dreaming is healthy, so we should probably arrange our sleep schedules so that that doesn't happen that often. But it happens from time to time, right? People's experience of sleep are different. The same thing is actually said about that barzakh that takes place, that there will be people who wake up from barzakh and they'll be like, did that really happen? And they'll wonder. But that's seen as that state. It's the life in the grave is oftentimes what barzakh is known as. And in that, it's going to be determined, is that going to be amazing for you? Or is that going to be actually difficult for you based on how you lived the life that you were while you were here? And then after that, there's the life of the day of judgment. That it's a long day in which ultimate justice is administered. And why is this one important? Because Muslims are supposed to recognize that you are supposed to be a force of peace and justice on this earth. But if you cannot do it, and you will never be able to fully do it, know that there is going to be a day of ultimate justice. So it doesn't matter whether you can achieve your goal or not. Your goal is to try, because what you're building is not actually changing, you're not in charge of a perfect place. You're in charge of perfecting your character. You're in charge of perfecting your response so that you will be ready to inherit the perfect place. The world is a flawed space that is meant to be fixed. We're supposed to be trying to fix it. But whether you succeed or you don't, there will be something that you are changing, which is what? Your inner personality, that soul that God blessed you with, you're trying to elevate it and elevate it and elevate it. And that's supposed to be the journey that you're kind of going on. That will be judged on the day of judgment. That's the 5th of these stations. And the 6th of these stations is the ultimate destination. It's going to be this idea of whether you are going to be in internal bliss and in closeness with God, that you utilize the previous stations to what? Get to know God, which was truly the purpose. Or did you end up wasting that and turning away? And one of the worst punishments that's found within our tradition is actually to be far away from God. That actually some people will be on that day unable to see God and unable to be with God to the point where they have to ask others around them, can you tell God for us? Because they can't speak to God directly, and we ask to be saved from such a space. Muslims do believe in both a paradise and a hellfire, but that's the ultimate space. But that's the 6th and final stop. One opinion says there's 6 stops, one opinion says there's 7 stops. That some people will make it into paradise right away, and others will have to go through a purification process before they get to paradise. But we hope to all be amongst those that go through 6 journeys of life, not 7. But that's the outline of where we are. What I want to speak about today it's already 8:38? Okay, what I want to speak about today in depth is actually the first station that I spoke about, which was what? This apparent space in which God gathered all souls together and said, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? I got to ask a question. How many of you have seen the movie Soul? You don't have to be shy. There we go. Now more hands go up. Okay. In that movie, it's a Disney, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a Disney movie that's about a soul. Sure. But in this movie, you have this idea that human soul goes through a journey before life and after life. And actually, one of the screenwriters of that movie quotes from, not the director, but the screenwriter, quotes from a book that was written by an Islamic scholar named Ibn Hazm. It's called Fawq al-Hamam. And in it, he says that all people were gathered together, and based on who you were next to in that life, your affinity was created. He doesn't use the term affinity, but he uses the term like, what is your ala? What is your special gift? And that's actually found within that movie, that people have that propensity or that gift. It's actually coming from that space. But anyway, this is actually something that Muslims believe, that so much of who you are, part of your personality, actually is past more than just what you were raised with. You actually had something within you. And what I want to actually narrate today is the story of creation in the Islamic paradigm. And it's found in 5 different places in the Quran. What was recited today was the paradigm that it's found with in Surah Al-Baqarah, the 2nd chapter of the Quran. And in it, those were the verses that were recited. God announces to the angels that I'm going to be creating this thing that's going to be my representative on the earth. Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. And then the angels ask, why are you creating something that's going to do 2 things? يَفْسِدُ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَيَشْفِقُ الدِّمَاءِ. Why are you creating a creation that's going to just cause corruption on the earth and going to cause a bunch of fasad? يَشْفِقُ الدِّمَاء is going to cause bloodshed on this earth. So God is creating, the story in our tradition is, God existed before the human being. There is this idea of a singular creator, and Muslims will always stick to the idea of a singular creator. Why? Because and the Quran talks about this over and over again, if there were multiple creation or creators, you would see chaos amongst the creation. Because what would happen? One would decide one thing, one would decide another thing. That goes against the attributes of God. There are no contradictions within God. It's this idea that look at the sky around you, look at its proportion. Look at the earth underneath you, look at its proportion. Look at what happy accidents have to happen for life to exist. These didn't come out of nowhere. It came from a perfect creator. So that's why Muslims will go for a singular creator, but there was a singular creator, and that creator, to show the attributes of the creator, created all of creation. And human beings are considered one of the many creations of God, but the human being does have a couple of things that are special. And today we are going to be looking at 2 out of the 5 stories of creation that are found within the Islamic paradigm or within the Quran. The first time it's found, it focuses a lot on the idea of who's the human being in comparison to who the human being is not. I'm also going to be quoting from one other place, which is in Surah Al-Hijr, Surah number 38, in which God will specifically say, what was it about this special creation that made me say that they're better, they are more qualified than the rest of creation? Like, Muslims believe rocks are awesome. Rocks are really cool. Geology? Anyone take a geology class? Some of you are like, yes, this is my moment. They're a really cool creation of God. Actually, Allah talks about many different types of rocks in the Quran. It's a really cool subject, but rocks aren't going to be questioned on the Day of Judgment. Why were you an igneous rock and not a metamorphic? That won't happen. The human being gets that. Why? We'll go over that in just a little bit. But that's found in Surah Al-Hijr, in Surah Al-A'raf, the 7th chapter of the Quran. That same conversation of the creation of Adam is brought up, but this time it's trying to understand the psychology of the one that doesn't want the human being to accomplish what they were supposed to do. It actually talks about Iblis or Satan, the idea of what did Shaitan do that caused him to not appreciate the human being and earned him his status. That's the focus in Surah Al-A'raf. You have other narrations, other places in which it talks about what about human tendencies? Where do those come from? That's another version or retelling of the story. But today, again, we're focusing on 2 of them. The first is God created all of this magnificent creation. God created angels who end up being the perfect representatives of God's will. Angels in the Islamic tradition are beings created from light, that they only obey God, they never disobey God. And there's something beautiful about their existence, but then after the angels were created and they are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, God created other creations. Muslims believe in jinn, another creation of God, that have free will just like we do, but they have a different realm of existence. They're actually in the unseen part of existence. And then the human being is talked about. But in this particular space, I first have to actually talk about the nature of language. When it's morning time, how do we normally say the sun has, do we say the refracted light from the sun has come out from there and the photons are now hitting the photoreceptors in my eyeballs? Anyone talk about sunrise that way? No, what do we say? The sun has risen. Why don't we say what we should be saying, which is what? Fission from the sun causes photons to be emitted that pass through millions of miles up to the Earth's atmosphere, in which they hit the Earth's atmosphere and scatter, and then the refracted light from the sun comes in and hits my photoreceptors in my eyeballs, and then I perceive light. Anyone say that? That's the actual accurate description of what's happening. Why don't we say that? It's too complicated, and also that's not the point of reference. What's the point of reference? How do you and I experience the sun? The sun has risen, right? It's sunrise. And I know like Muslims just came out of the month of Ramadan, in which they say from sunrise to sunset. Technically, you're not right. It's dawn to dusk, because we start fasting not when you see the sun rise, but when you see the refracted light from the sun. You know how the light bends when it hits the Earth's atmosphere? Kind of like when light goes through water, it bends. When light hits the atmosphere, it actually bends, and that's why before you actually see the sun, you can see the light from the sun. That we actually start our fast from the refracted light of the sun. It's dawn till dusk is the more accurate description, but that's okay. I'm trying to raise the level of discourse and understanding, guys. We're in college. Okay. But we say that. Same thing of like if I talked about the oceans, tides. What do we say? The tide comes in and the tide goes out. Does anyone say what's actually happening? Which is the earth is spinning and the moon is pulling on the water, so that the earth spins. The water is staying still, but the earth spins in a way that causes the water to seem like it's rising or seems like it's dropping. Does that make sense? So the earth is moving faster than the water can move, and that's what's actually causing the tides. No one says that, right? Because it's super impractical, and just assuming some of you didn't know that until this very moment. That's why there's like high tide, low tide, because it's whether it's at a right angle or a perpendicular angle. No? Okay. Anyway, that's how tides work, but no, none of you call it that. Why? Because we speak about things the way we experience them. That's exactly what's about to be done about the creation of the human being. We will talk about this the way that you and I experience it, that's going to cause us the most utility. It's not about being technically accurate. The Quran is a book of guidance, meaning it will narrate to you a story in the way it has the best benefit to you and me. It's going to be, and what's the best? Are you here because it's only 5 minutes? Okay, phew. It's going to give you and me the most benefit from having heard it this way. Following me still? So, God says that we created the human being in this way, and then the angels immediately question, why are you creating something that's going to cause these things? Because the angels, there seems to be a couple of different understandings, and Muslims actually believe, this is where I'm going to talk about how Islam intersects with some certain theories of other theories of how life was made. That they look at this human being, and God hasn't told anything about a soul being blown in yet. It's just that in our tradition, the body of Adam has been created. And the angels look at this thing and they go, why are you creating this thing? There's a couple of different theories as to why the angels said it. One is because God had created a previous creation called the jinn, and they used to cause this type of issue. Slight difference of opinion on that though is because jinn don't have blood. Yashfiqu dima doesn't make any sense. Adam of blood, and dima, jinn are made of fire. How do they have blood? One opinion is actually they looked at the body of Adam and they said, there's a bunch of these that already live on earth. They look just like this thing, and all they do is cause corruption, and all they do is cause bloodshed. There's a bunch of hominid-looking things that look like us, on earth already. And that's all they do. And God responds, إِنْ يَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. I know what you don't know. And then in this particular telling, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that then God told Adam the names of everything, and Adam named the names of everything, and then God asked the angels, can you name what I just told them? And the angels said, we can't. And God says, look, well, God doesn't say that. That's more of like an interpretation. This idea of the human being is capable of something you as the angels cannot do. And it's just like proving that Adam is actually more capable than the rest of creation. And it's this approach. What I want to focus on now is jump to the 38th chapter of the Quran, in which this exact same story is told, but this time the emphasis is different. I can get my phone to go into light mode. Okay, I don't know what's going on. I'll still go through it. So this is found in the 38th chapter of the Quran, and the same thing is said. That I'm going to be creating, mentioned when your Lord said, indeed I will create a human being from clay. And then God says three other things. I'm going to narrate this creation story one more time. And when I have proportioned him, سَوَّرْنَاهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ الرُّوحِ, then fall into prostration. So far we have in this telling of the story that God creates the human being, and God does two other things. Proportions them perfectly, and blows into them some sort of spirit or soul. And here is the crux of what today's conversation is going to be about. I know I keep leading up to it, now we're actually there. When God gets us there, right away there is someone who says, I don't value this creation. The story continues that God says to the angels, Sajadu, all of you bow down to this creation that God has created. That human being was honored in such a way that all of the other creation that existed at that time had to bow down. All of them bow down except for Iblis. And Iblis in that moment says, I will not bow down. Why? خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِن طِينٍ. You created me from fire. You literally see fire in front of you. Scary. Okay. You created me from fire, and you created him from clay. But in this telling of the story, did God just say, I created Adam from clay, so bow down to him? No, what did God say? I created him from clay, then I added to it balance. سَوَّرْنَاكُمْ وَنَفَخْتُ مِن رُوحِي. And then I blew into him our soul. Those two other elements of the human being are super important. Those two elements of the human being is when Muslims believe that to understand the origin of life, you have to understand God in God's self. God doesn't create without purpose. And when God created the human being, it was such a monumental creation that all of the other creation had to actually submit. That look, this is something that's amazing. This is something that can do something that we cannot. And I'll give two analogies to paint that. In my home, some of you have heard me do this before, I have three classes of creatures. I have fish. I love my fish. And I hope they love me. But when I really think about it, my fish, what's their responsibility to me? Don't die. That's basically it. I feed them and I take care of their habitat. And what happens? They sit there and look pretty and they eat food. Hopefully don't fight each other. There is aggression. It's a little bit more complicated, but that's my fish in a nutshell. And then I have a cat, or had a cat. It's with a friend right now, but I have a cat, let's say. I love my cat more than I love my fish. Don't tell my fish that. But my cat is able to show me love in a way that my fish can never do it. My cat actually comes up to me and cuddles with me. I'll randomly be it's almost always when I'm on the keyboard, my cat wants pets. Right? It just like comes up and like rolls on the keyboard and destroys all the work I've been doing. But it wants to be pet, and it wants to be in like this state of a loving relationship, and it can show me so much more than my fish ever could. And to be fair, it also has more of a responsibility as a result of that capability. My cat has to use the litter box, or else she gets timeouts. Yeah, I actually give my cat timeouts. But that happens. My cat has to be good to my kids. We'll get it. That's the third class of creature in my home. We'll get to them in a second. But, or else what? I expect certain things of my cat. My cat can frustrate me in ways that my fish can never do. My fish can't really frustrate me. Like, what are they gonna do? Oh, I didn't. It's almost always my fault when they don't do something right because they don't have much choice in the matter. My cat, though, there are times in which my cat's a good cat or a bad cat. That happens. Now, some of you saw where this is going already. There's a third class of creature in my home. My children. The love that I have for them doesn't compare to what it is for my cat or my fish. Of course I love my kids more. But I can also tell you that, man, if you're blessed with kids in the future, inshallah, kids will put you through trials that a pet could never do. You will be more scared, more fearful, to be fair, more happy too, than you've ever been in your life. Because a child has a way of showing love and affection to you that these other things could never do. And to be fair, I expect more. My daughter, for example, she's not here today because it's kind of cold, but my daughter, for example, when she surprises me, it brings more happiness to me than anything else could. But also, when she's sick, I can't sleep. Because why? The love has increased in such a significant fashion. That's one of the things that Muslims believe is unique about the human being. That here is this creation of God that has the ability of choosing, that has this ability of glorifying God and recognizing God in a way that no creature beforehand could do. And that's why it's so loved by God. But just like, and analogies of parent to children don't actually work to describe the relationship between God and the human being, but just like that, when there's such a big relationship that can be had, it carries with it the other side as well. It could also turn into some of the most difficult experiences for both the child and the parent in this analogy, and also the analogy of God's love for you and God's disappointment with you. That same way that capability comes with a significant responsibility, and that's captured within the story. When God says, in a triumphant way actually, when I created the human being and then I fashioned the human being. In certain places in the Quran, God says, I fashioned the human being with my own 2 hands. Why? Because I was proud of this creation. Look at what it's capable of doing. There are many narrations in the Islamic tradition where God will tell the angels and say, do you see my servant? Do you see that they're praising me? And the angels already know, because remember, the angels don't have any free will. Like, yeah, they are. But God's showing off us. Because why? It's this idea of so much love. Look, I gave it free will. And they're choosing to obey me. Beautiful in terms of kind of like what the relationship is. Are you guys getting me? But then the one who wants you to undermine it says something interesting. That when you want to undermine the human being, you actually take away these 3 attributes of the human being. The 3 attributes are what? You were created from teen, from clay, that were made of a substance of this earth. If we go back to what I was saying, that God created the human being, and right then the angel said, why would you do this? God said, I know what you don't know, and then makes the human being go through this test, right, of knowing things. Another place in the Quran when God says that is, we fashioned him, gave him balance. Sawaytuhu. Sawaytuhu is this idea of you and I have emotions, and you and I have rationale. And you actually direct yourself with both. That you can sometimes choose to listen to your emotions, and you can sometimes choose to listen to your reason. That's what people do, and that's what we would call as intelligence, actually. Someone who is that intelligent, they do exactly what they feel every single moment. And actually in the Arabic language, hijr, nuha, all of these things are called intelligence because it restricts you. Because at the end of the day, someone who is smart is able to see what? Short-term benefit, long-term benefit, and they say, I will go for long-term benefit and sacrifice short-term benefit. We would call that something that's intelligent, correct? The human being has been capable of this. I remember testing this on the day of Eid just a couple of days ago, so many fish stories, but I was feeding my fish in the morning, and as I was feeding them, I suddenly said, stop. Do you think any of them stopped? No, they're fish. They just kept nibbling away at the food. And then I went over to my son, and I gave him a French toast stick. So it's one of his favorite foods. And as he was eating it, I go, Ayub, can you put that down for a second? And he looks at me and he's like, Baba? Like, why would you tell me to do this? But then he puts it down, yes. And I tell him, can you take this to your mom? And he calls his mom Mommy Shark. Don't ask. He goes, to Mommy Shark? I'm like, okay, I have to do what he says too. Yes, Mommy Shark, can you give this to her? Right? And then he goes upstairs and gives it to her, and then comes back down, and then he starts eating his French toast stick again. And I was like, this is the difference. One has sawaita, who has balance, to recognize what? You know, my dad is telling me to do something, so I'll stop eating this delicious syrup-filled thing and do the house that I live in right now. Let's go figure out another material to build homes from. Let's try to figure out how to shoot rockets up to Mars, and then maybe we'll live there. This idea that we constantly go for more and more and more and more. Why? Well, actually, in the Islamic paradigm, it's because the human being was never meant to just stay here. This place was a training ground for you to develop your soul so that what? You could inherit the actual world God has for you, which is this idea that you have an afterlife that you're going for. You have tasted, almost in a metaphorical way, you were a person of paradise, of Jannah before. So what are you looking to recreate? This idea of a paradise. But the actual process of this was supposed to be, you had a soul within you, you cultivate it so it could get to paradise. So that's why you're always chasing after something, but you're never going to be quite satisfied. Because what you're chasing after is not actually from this dunya. It's actually in the hereafter itself. So that's why this idea of the soul. But when Iblis, Satan in our tradition, wants to undermine the human being, you know what he says? خَلَقْتَهُ مِنْ طِينٍ. You created him from clay, and that's it. He doesn't say وَسَوَّيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ الرُّوحِ. He doesn't say that you balanced him and you blew into him part of a soul. Because if he had said that, he would have lost the argument. So he doesn't do that. And this is something that almost anyone who is a bad faith debater will do. They will straw man your argument. You said something, but they'll take like the one grammatical mistake you made and just talk about that, rather than the whole of your argument. That's what Shaitan tries to do with God. Says, no, you created him from teen, from that, and that's worse than fire, so I'm better. Seems to be this tradition trying to undermine the human being. And that's actually in our tradition something that the detractors of God will tell you, all you are is a body. They will take away from you this idea that you are a soul. You're meant for nothing more. And the Muslim is supposed to say, actually, God honored me with so much more. I'm not just my body. That's a part of who I am. It is. It's a huge part. It's a part of who I am. But I also have the ability of controlling this body in a balanced way, of balancing my intellect and my emotions, of balancing my wants and my needs, of balancing all of these things. And last, I actually have a soul, which means what? That this isn't even my final destination. I don't want to get as much as I can here if it's going to come at the expense of destroying my soul. I want to live in a way that's what? I get to nourish my body while also taking care of this next destination that my soul is headed towards as well. That's a part of the human being. And when that gets undermined, the human being goes into a complete state of loss. Because all they think is, this little body that I'm in, that's all that'll be there. And going back to that original story, and I know I'm over time at this point. Going back to that original story, when God asked the angels to bow down and one didn't bow down, and the angels had complained beforehand, why are you creating this thing that's just going to cause issues on this earth? If the human being doesn't live up to its potential, it's going to do exactly what the angels thought it was going to do, which is it's going to cause bloodshed on earth, and it's going to cause for corruption amongst each other. But if the human being could get past that reality and recognize that you have a greater goal that you're heading towards, you were made for so much more. They can actually be ones that are literally the beings that God brags about. In the Islamic paradigm, God is proud of the human being. This idea of, it doesn't matter if other people are proud of you or not. If God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, is proud of you and knows that you are capable of so much. نَحْنُ كَرَّمْنَا بَنُو Adam. We have honored the children of Adam. This idea that each and every person has the opportunity of being held in high esteem by God. That's actually what this deen really teaches at the end of the day. That you as a human being have a value that cannot be measured, that only God created you for. And the whole point of this tradition is to do what? Make you recognize and appreciate it, because when you appreciate it, God will bless you with what that value actually was. which you might see it in this world, and sometimes that looks like dignity. You'll see people who are happy, fulfilled, regardless of what their circumstances. Because why? They recognize their worth as a human being. I am more than just my body. I am my body, my intellect, balance, and I am my spirit, my soul. And when all three of those come into alignment with each other, you will see people go through some of the most difficult things that life will throw at them, but they will never lose their dignity. Because they know what? In the mention of God, I am still high. And on the opposite side, you will see people who will do everything that they can for their bodies. They'll take care of it, they'll pamper it, they'll feed it the best food, they'll be in luxury their entire life. But there's no fulfillment. There's no dignity. They're always chasing more and more and more. Because why? They're not taking care of the entirety of their creation. You are a creation that has a body, an intellect, and a soul. And you were created to take care of all three of them. And if you neglect them, you're going to suffer the consequences. And it's not going to feel fulfilled. And the idea of our tradition is to live in a way in which you're taking care of all of these. And that's what I wanted us to focus on with that first station again, which is what? You are a soul that will then be breathed into a body, and then how that body interacts, whether it can balance itself, take care of its physical needs, balance itself, and take care of its spiritual needs, that it'll feel fulfilled to move on in the best of manner to the stage that comes next. So I wanted to get into a lot more, but I'll end it off here because we do want to have time for Q&A. Thank you so much for listening so patiently, everyone. I know it's cold right now, but I'll be here for another 20 or 30 minutes or so if we have any questions. And if you want to come and talk to me afterwards individually, feel free to do so as well. Hi, Carrie.
All right, inshallah, let's start off the Q&A. We're going to take a few questions. So if anyone has any questions, they can just raise their hand. Come on, guys, don't be shy. All right, Muiz.
Can you talk more about how the soul becomes part of the body or gets inside the body?
Yeah. So the question was, can I talk more about how the soul gets into the body? There's a couple of different kind of interpretations of this. The original creation story of Adam is that God's self blew the soul of God into Adam. And it's this kind of beautiful kind of association that we are both a spirit and a body. One of my favorite quotes that you see in almost every hospital chaplaincy space is, you are not a physical being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a physical experience. So cool. It's like a really profound element because your spirit is actually more long-lived than your body will be. So that's the general understanding that is there in terms of on a theological level, that a soul was blown into the body of Adam. And this is on the other side, what I wanted to bring up is Muslims get into this thing all the time of wait, so can Muslims not believe in the theory of evolution because Adam was created by God? This is where I have to give an ambiguous answer, which is this, that Muslims do not confirm scientific theories like that, and Muslims do not deny scientific theories like that. And why I say both is, I oftentimes have to go with, do we currently have a geocentric view of the universe or a heliocentric view of the universe? I know some of you are saying heliocentric, but we don't because the sun is in its own orbit too. But yes, you're right that in olden times people used to think that every planet revolves around the earth. The Quran has always said that the earth revolves around the sun, but the Quran also says ash-shamsu wal-qamaru that's not the right verse. But in Surah Yasin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says that the sun and the moon are in their own respective orbits, and people used to attack the Quran and say, your book says that the sun is in an orbit. The sun is a stationary object. The sun doesn't orbit anything. The sun is stationary. It's not until the 70s in which we realized that the sun is in a super orbit within the Milky Way. The sun is in its own orbit. And Muslims are being attacked over and over again. Your book is wrong about the sun being in an orbit. That's why we don't confirm to a singular theory because we say it will supersede whatever the understanding currently is. But there's this idea that, where did our bodies come from? God doesn't seem to emphasize the idea of where the body of the human being came from. God seems to say that actually your ability to balance, your ability of having a soul, that's what's unique. When Adam was just a creation of clay, God didn't tell the angels to bow down. It was only after the soul had been blown and after an intellect was given. So what Muslims will say and hold on to is your intellect, your morality, it came from a divine place. And to me, that's also so much more satisfying. You know why? Because if we go that human beings are just a production off of random rules of nature that we can see, like natural selection, does anyone want to live in a world like that? What I mean by that is, what are some natural social conclusions to it? The weak should be led to die. Any deformity, we shouldn't have any empathy, because why? They were just weak. Let them. Some of the worst tendencies of the human being come from that type of thinking. But we say no. It doesn't matter where our bodies come from. You know what matters? God gave us our morality. God gave us our intellect. So you don't have to follow observed rules. You follow the rules that are coming from a divine source. That's so much more satisfying as well. But to answer the question about when the soul comes in, it's generally believed through hadith literature that the soul comes into the womb of the mother. And there's a difference of opinion in terms of when that soul gets blown in. Generally speaking, it's understood to be at around 120 days, and some by a little bit earlier than that. And it's generally understood as when the heart and the spine, for those of you who study embryology, start to sync up. The heart starts beating way earlier than that, but there's a moment in which the nervous center actually connects with your heart. Something really cool is your heart has about 20,000 neurons in it. That for most muscles in your body, your mind tells you to do something, right? And your body does it. That's how it works. So like, my hand grasps a water bottle, and it's not that slow because it's not that, alhamdulillah, it's not that cold. I'm next to a fire. I'm sorry for those of you who aren't. But there's something really cool that your heart has about 20,000 neurons. Sometimes your mind will tell your heart, speed up, speed up, speed up. And you know what your heart says? No thanks. That's actually true. And it sends a signal in the reverse. And if that wasn't done, we would die of fright all the time. That's actually true. Because why? Sometimes your mind doesn't do what's best for it. God actually blessed you with the heart having certain amount of control in it too. Something beautiful just about that in terms of how that works. Sometimes your heart actually overrules your mind, but the other way can work as well. But that's generally the answer to that question, is it's blown into your mother's womb. And that's one of the reasons that scholars have said that's why the mother has such a high station in the Islamic tradition, because she actually bears two souls. That's why her value increases so much. In the Islamic tradition, there's a narration of the Prophet ﷺ that says, paradise is under the feet of the mother. And one of the ways that it's seen is, it's actually because in a human mother will be this beautiful kind of interaction. Is one, they have this organ within them that is the epitome of mercy. It's called a rihim. And one of the names of God, Ar-Rahman, comes from the root word of rihim. Rihim is actually the womb of the mother, because it's the place of mercy. And another kind of cool aspect of this, 3 generations are sometimes found within one mother. Like, how does that work? Sorry guys, this is not something that you can really experience. But when a mother has a daughter in her womb, she also has her granddaughter in her womb. Isn't that kind of cool? Those of you who are biology majors, you get it. Those of you who aren't, I'm sorry, we can talk about it later. I'll tell you why. Because the eggs that are within a human being's ovaries are actually developed while a little girl is still in the womb. So it's kind of beautiful how that works, that 3 generations are shared in one. And that's why there's such an emphasis given of like, this act of creation is found within the female that is not necessarily found within the male. So much more emphasis of mercy and blessings is given as a result of that.
Okay, inshallah, if anyone has any questions, if anyone has any more questions. Okay, all right. I think Chaplain will be here for a little bit longer if anyone wants to come and ask Chaplain any questions separately. But inshallah, I know everyone's a little cold, so we're going to get to food. Afan?